Within Fallout, few enemies are as intimidating and interesting as the super mutant. They wandered the wasteland with their jacked bodies and Sigma jawlines looking for humans to mutate. But where did these super mutants come from? What motivates them? Do they like pina coladas and getting caught in the rain? Today on Poseidon Films, we investigate the origin of super mutants in our latest entry to our Fallout lore series. If you like Fallout lore videos, I made a playlist with all our related videos and you can find a link in the description below. Check it out if you like this video. So within Fallout, there is a large variety of enemies that have gained advanced combat abilities thanks to their exposure to heavy doses of radiation. This radiation has caused mutations, and the survival of the fittest principle of the wasteland has naturally meant that only the biggest, meanest, most mutated individuals of species have reproduced. Over the hundreds of years, deathclaws have become supremely dangerous, and rad roaches have become capable of eating a human alive. Super mutants are different because they actually gain their powers through exposure to viruses. Super mutants were at one point a normal human being like you and I. One day they had some unfortunate luck and were exposed to some gas. Unlike your dad's gas after he eats too much Taco Bell, this one does more than just trigger your gag reflex. This gas is an exposure to something called the forced evolutionary virus in the Fallout universe. This virus is an artificial substance that was created before the Great War. It forces a severe change in the genetics of anyone infected. There are multiple different strains throughout the series, but all of them transform a human into a genetically mutated superhuman. These abilities include extreme strength, endurance that would make a marathon runner blush, resistance to diseases, and an immunity to radiation. Some strains even provide a huge boost in intelligence to continue work on the super mutant project. The thing about this mutation is that it leaves anyone who undergoes it completely sterile and unable to reproduce. This means the only way for them to grow their population is to kidnap humans and subject them to the transformation process. Across the wasteland, people have learned to have a deep fear of the mutants, and for good reason. They will absolutely kidnap you. They exist all across the wasteland too. While some creatures are isolated on either the east or west coast, super mutants span the totality of the game. The west coast harbors mostly super mutants that were developed with the FEV2 virus. This particular subset of the virus was initially used as a generic hold-in for gene splicing, but was soon turned into a transforming compound for humans. The transformation was able to take a standard-sized human and turn him into a 9-foot-tall, 400-pound behemoth. The skin becomes much tougher and radiation is unable to cause any damage to your genetics. It also completely wipes out all weaknesses within your genes when you complete your transformation. For example, let's say you have a genetic predisposition to cancer. Just go ahead and take the FEV2 virus and you can kiss those weaknesses goodbye. You will also be transformed into a 9-foot-tall superhuman with green skin, but that might be a risk you have to be willing to take. The longer an individual is exposed to the virus, the more dumb they become. For example, the second generation of super mutants was so unintelligent they weren't even able to take care of themselves. This was so they could be easily controlled and influenced by the Enclave. They were originally being created by a creature called the Master, who, other than being uglier than your mother, also had a knack for being able to control these creatures. He felt that a lot of the weaknesses of civilization that had led to the downfall of humanity could be overcome if everyone was willing to be injected with the forced evolutionary virus. He plans to slowly conquer the wasteland with the help of his super mutant army and then force any survivors to be mutated. At the time, the Master was unaware that super mutants are unable to reproduce on their own. It would have been unfortunate to get rid of all humans just to find out you can't have kids. This Master was a bit of a mutant in his own way. He was made up of dozens of people and mutants combined into a computer network. This meant he had a similar personality to that of someone with multiple personality disorder. He really did think that he had the ability to create a new race by experimenting on super mutation until he made the perfect species. On top of being obsessed with super mutants, he also had a doomsday cult that was obsessed with bringing an end to the human race. He was originally an inhabitant of Vault 8, but was eventually exiled for committing murder while inside the vault. Over a string of events that involve him taking the identity of a doctor, convincing a caravan leader to allow him to investigate super mutant attacks, leading a wasteland expedition where he discovered the super mutant base, being transformed after spending days in the virus, and then gaining the neurological ability to link to computers, he became the king of the super mutants across the wasteland. He would get test subjections for his various mutations by randomly kidnapping wastelanders from caravans that were moving across the wasteland. The humans thought the mutants were simpletons, so they thought the attacks were just them being barbaric creatures, when in reality, they were capturing test subjects for them to conduct medical experiments on. Eventually, he was able to gather enough mutants that he had an army he called the Unity. Only 15 to 20% of the transformations would be successful, meaning lots of humans lost their lives in the process. Ultimately, this colony of hyper-aggressive mutants and their master are defeated when their base of operations, the Mariposa military base, is destroyed in an attack by the protagonist of Fallout 1. While most of the super mutants are eliminated, not all of the army is taken out in this first explosion. The remnants of the army do end up scattered across the west coast, with some of them becoming raider groups of super mutants. A few of the more intelligent mutants have managed to integrate into the community and take up positions within the NCR. This is also around the time the Enclave created the second generation of super mutants. The first generation were able to hold positions of power, have conversations, and have philosophical thoughts of their own. The second generation was pretty much mindless drones with super strength that the Enclave had control over. While all of this was occurring in the 2230s, by the time Fallout New Vegas rolls around, their population has seriously dwindled. After all, they really have no way to reproduce without infecting humans, and people aren't exactly lining up to be turned into super mutants. This meant that as the decades ticked by, they naturally passed away, especially in a wasteland where lives tend to be short and cruel. The remaining population is focused on trying to normalize relations, but there are bands of mutants that kidnap humans throughout the wasteland for them to be transformed. Naturally, the human survivors are skeptical of anything a super mutant says, regardless of if they have good intentions or not. This is also when we are introduced to the Nightkin, who are a super mutant with near-perfect levels of mutation that have serious psychological issues. Thankfully, there was a cure invented that allowed them to be freed of a lot of their psychological ailments. This cure could be found at the Repcon test site, which was inhabited by crowds of feral ghouls at the time. The test site had a conflict where the Nightkin were able to secure the cure they needed to free themselves from psychosis, and the feral ghouls that inhabited got absolutely destroyed. I feel like challenging a crowd of super mutants who are undergoing psychosis is almost universally a very bad idea. Maybe that's because I'm an old school guy who doesn't like to gamble, but it feels a bit unnecessary to take that risk. As the West Coast population remained somewhat stable, a few of the mutants had made their way over towards the capital wasteland. As of the time of writing this, there aren't any known links that exist between the refugees from the West Coast and any of the East Coast super mutant factions that currently inhabit the wasteland. I would say that on the West Coast, the mutants had their peak population-wise around the time of the Master trying to go through with his plan to infect everyone in the wasteland. While their most hospitable point is around when they were able to hold positions like sheriff within towns and participate in normal society, their main issue is that relations will always be strained due to their need to forcefully transform humans into mutants. I feel like this makes it hard for humans to ever truly trust their intentions. At least for myself, I wouldn't trust a creature who used to be me before they underwent a forced mutation and now will never be able to reproduce. In the Capital Wasteland region, the super mutants were derived from a different version of the forced evolutionary virus called the Evolutionary Experimentation Program. This version was used in Vault 87 on unsuspecting vault dwellers. It was supposed to create super soldiers the post-war government could use in any surface conflicts. The people who were infected with this virus were transformed with insane upper body strength, thicker and bulletproof skin, and a slight reduction in brain function. Prolonged exposure to this version of the virus would leave you basically brain dead, and one female test subject would die due to loss of brain function after 2 weeks of exposure. The super mutants in Vault 87 were initially placed under strict security watch by the remaining humans in the vault, but eventually broke free of their bonds and took over the vault by force. At this point, they decided to transform the remaining humans into mutants. They may have had reduced brain function, but they were capable of replicating the process of dunking them into the virus substance. At this point, they decided their mission would be to go all over the wasteland and kidnap humans to bring them back and be mutated. For over 200 years, they terrorized the capital wasteland by kidnapping wastelanders at every turn and transforming them into freaks. This means that usually, if you find yourself out in the capital wasteland and stumble upon a super mutant, there is a very good chance they are going to act in an aggressive manner and either kill you or kidnap you to be transformed. The relations between humans and super mutants in the capital region have never gotten to the point we've seen on the West Coast where they can have some overlap and live in harmony. Obviously, the human inhabitants of the wasteland are less than thrilled to be kidnapped, but the super mutants had used up all of their transformation liquid over 200 years. They now scour the wasteland looking for more of their so-called green stuff so they can continue their process of always creating more mutants. They are just intelligent enough to be dangerous, but not smart enough to do anything like maintenance on Vault 87 or create new technology to help them on their quest. They are a faction that takes much more of a brute force approach. While on the West Coast, there were towns where mutants and humans lived side by side. In the entire capital wasteland, there are only 2 super mutants that exist that wouldn't want to strike you down for being human. The capital super mutants are certainly a lot more brutish than their West Coast counterparts, and as such, they need to be treated as much more of a threat as you go on your journey through the wasteland. It is interesting how much differently the mutants turn out depending on which version of the evolutionary virus they end up infected with. The Commonwealth has mutants that were created with the Institute's use of a virus sample they discovered. They were at one point being used in their quest to create a Generation 3 synth. But when it was found they wouldn't be useful for its creation, they were let loose into the wasteland. You thought Florida was unlucky because people let their pythons go, but at least they didn't let super mutants out into your backyard. These mutants wound up creating multiple different factions that are usually hostile towards humans due to their bad experiences with them so far. Sometimes they are able to bridge the gap and create friendships with humans, and some have reported that there is a mutant named Strong who can be seen accompanying adventurers through the Commonwealth wasteland. There are other mutants who have found ways to live in harmony with humans, and their relationships are a lot more like the West Coast than the capital area. The humans are always wary in their interactions, but they know it is possible to have friends with super mutants, compared with the capital, where it is shoot first and ask questions late, and this is a much more stable relationship. The strain that created the super mutants in the Commonwealth is the only strain that has a cure that allows the process to be reversed. An Institute scientist was the first to create a serum that transformed his DNA back into a human rather than the super mutant he had become. It was able to overwrite the changes in DNA done by the FEV virus. Some mutants are looking for a cure to transform them back into a normal human, while others are stubborn that they actually enjoy their new existence with super strength more. I will say being a super mutant is a big leg up in most wasteland interactions. In the Appalachian region, the mutants are a direct result of the West Tech Research Center in the mountains nearby. The research center had been home to lots of sample virus material that could be used to infect individuals, and after the war, these materials managed to expose a majority of the Huntersville area with the virus. Any survivors in the area were then exposed to the virus by members of the Enclave because they wanted the DEFCON rating of the region to increase so they could get access to more missiles. The super mutants in this area are anything but friendly to humans. They are known for being extremely aggressive and violent. Most of the factions that exist in the area have them listed amongst their most prominent enemies that are relentless in their attempted attacks. Their population is the highest here compared to other regions due to the mass exposure event that shattered the town of Huntersville. If you ever find yourself wandering the wasteland in this region, just be prepared to have an encounter with hyper-aggressive super mutants that roam nearby. They aren't an easy enemy to take down either. Their mutated skin makes them impervious to most forms of damage, and they aren't small by any means. They have an intimidating presence, and while experienced explorers will be able to land a few critical hits to take care of the issue, for an inexperienced wastelander, an encounter with a super mutant usually ends up being their last. All super mutants owe their existence to the forced evolutionary virus, but the type and area the transformation takes place in is one of the most important factors in how the super mutant will behave and act going forward. That is the tale of the super mutant, their origins, and their behaviors across the different wastelands that exist within the game. If you enjoyed this Fallout lore video, just another reminder that I put the playlist with the rest of our lore videos in the description down below, so check that out. If you enjoyed it, you should also press the like button and comment what type of Fallout lore you'd like to see next. We are trying to hit 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so if you really enjoyed the video, you should also subscribe. We post lore videos from different types of games, but also investigate the biggest stories and news in gaming. Thank you all so much for watching this video.